What happens when one of music's biggest legends sits down for what should be a simple chat about his new album and instead finds himself under attack from a host who refuses to stay professional? It only took one dismissive comment about his career for the entire interview to spiral into one of the most shocking confrontations in daytime television history. Elton John walked onto the Loose Women set that afternoon, expecting a friendly conversation. The studio audience clapped as he made his way to the panel, waving and smiling at the familiar faces of the hosts. Denise Welch sat in the center position, flanked by Kay Adams, Nadia Sawalha, and Janet Street Porter. The cameras rolled, and the interview began innocently enough. "So Elton, lovely to have you here," Denise started, leaning back in her chair with a casual confidence. "You've got a new album coming out. Tell us, is this just another one for the collection, or are you actually trying to say something this time?" The audience went quiet. Elton's smile faltered slightly as he processed the question. Kay Adams shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing between Denise and their guest. "Well, every album I create has meaning," Elton replied carefully. "This one is particularly personal because it deals with—" Right, Denise interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "But let's be honest. At your age, how many more albums can you really have in you? Aren't you just repeating yourself at this point?" Nadia Sawalha's eyes widened, and she let out a small, nervous laugh. "Denise, I think what we mean is—" "No, I know what I mean," Denise cut her off, keeping her focus on Elton. "I'm just asking the question everyone at home is thinking. When do you know it's time to stop?" Elton sat up straighter, his polite smile now completely gone. "I create music because I love it, not because I need to prove anything to anyone. I've been doing this for over 50 years, and I'll continue as long as I feel inspired." 50 years, Denise repeated with a smirk. "That's exactly my point. Hasn't the world heard enough? I mean, how many times can you sit at a piano and play the same 3 chords?" The audience gasped audibly. Janet Street Porter leaned forward, clearly ready to intervene. "I don't think that's fair, Denise. Elton's contributions to music are—" "Oh, please, Janet," Denise rolled her eyes. "We all know he's had hits, but that was decades ago. What has he done lately that's actually relevant?" Elton's face flushed red. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "Relevant? I've sold out arenas around the world. My farewell tour was one of the highest grossing tours in history. I think my fans would disagree with your assessment." "Your fans," Denise said with air quotes. "You mean the people stuck in the past who can't move on? The ones who probably still have vinyl records and think cassette tapes are coming back?" Kay Adams put her hand on Denise's arm. "Maybe we should talk about the charity work Elton does. His foundation has raised—" "I don't want to talk about charity," Denise snapped at Kay before turning back to Elton. "I want to know why someone with your money and success feels the need to keep putting out music that nobody asked for." Elton stood up abruptly, his microphone still clipped to his jacket. "Nobody asked for. I have millions of people who eagerly await everything I create. The fact that you don't understand or appreciate, that says far more about you than it does about me." "Oh, sit down," Denise laughed, gesturing at his chair. "Don't be so sensitive. I'm just having a conversation." "A conversation?" Elton's voice rose. "You've done nothing but insult me since I sat down. You've questioned my relevance, my talent, and my right to continue doing what I love. That's not a conversation. That's an attack." Nadia tried to smooth things over. "Elton, I think we're all huge fans of your work. Your songwriting with Bernie Taupin has given us some of the most beautiful—" "Don't patronize me," Elton cut her off, his eyes still fixed on Denise. "I came here as a courtesy, to talk about my music and my life, and I've been treated with complete disrespect." Denise leaned back and crossed her arms. "If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you're not as legendary as you think you are. Every other guest who sits in that chair manages to deal with my interview style just fine." "Your interview style?" Elton shook his head in disbelief. Is that what you call this? Being needlessly cruel and dismissive to someone who's achieved more in music than you could ever dream of understanding? The audience began murmuring among themselves. Some people were clearly on Elton's side, while others seemed shocked by the escalating tension. Janet Street Porter finally spoke up again. I think we need to take a breath here. This is getting out of hand. No, Janet, let's not take a breath, Elton said firmly. Let's address what's really happening here. This host invited me onto her show with the sole purpose of tearing me down. She doesn't care about my music, my career, or anything I have to say. She just wants to create drama for ratings. Denise's face hardened. How dare you? I ask challenging questions because that's my job. If you want people to just worship you and tell you how wonderful you are, maybe you should stick to your echo chamber of yes men. Challenging questions. Elton laughed bitterly. You asked me when I'm going to stop making music because you think I'm irrelevant. You mocked my fans. You reduced my entire body of work to 3 chords on a piano. Those aren't challenging questions, they're insults wrapped in fake journalism. Kay Adams looked at the camera desperately, clearly hoping someone would cut to commercial. Perhaps we should... And another thing, Elton continued, his voice strong and unwavering. You sit here on your talk show panel, chatting about celebrities and current events, acting like you're some authority on what matters in culture. But what have you actually contributed? What have you created that will last? What legacy are you leaving behind? Denise's mouth dropped open. For the first time in the interview, she seemed at a loss for words. The other panelists sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. That's what I thought, Elton said into her silence. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines. It's easy to tear down people who've actually put themselves and their art into the world. But it takes real courage to create something meaningful, to pour your heart and soul into your work, knowing that people like you will always be waiting to diminish it. You arrogant, Denise started, but Elton held up his hand. No, I'm done listening to you, he said with icy calm. I've sat here and tolerated your disrespect for long enough. I don't need this. I don't need your platform, and I certainly don't need your approval. Nadia made one last attempt. Elton, please, let's just reset. We can start over and talk about... There's nothing to reset. Elton interrupted gently, but firmly. This interview is over. I will not sit here and be treated like my life's work is worthless by someone who clearly has no appreciation for artistry or basic human decency. He reached down and unclipped his microphone, setting it carefully on the chair. The studio had gone completely silent except for the sound of his movements. Every camera stayed focused on him as he prepared to leave. Denise finally found her voice again. You can't just walk out. We're in the middle of a live show. Watch me, Elton replied simply. This is completely unprofessional, Denise called after him. You agreed to do this interview. Elton turned back to face her one last time. I agreed to an interview, not a character assassination. There's a difference, though clearly you don't understand that. Janet Street Porter stood up. Elton, I apologize for how this went. This isn't how we normally... I appreciate that, Janet, Elton nodded at her. But the damage is done. I came here in good faith, and I was ambushed. I won't subject myself to any more of this nonsense. The audience began to clap. It started with just a few people, but quickly grew into sustained applause. People stood from their seats, showing their support for Elton and their disapproval of how he'd been treated. Denise looked around in shock as her own audience turned against her. Oh, sit down, she snapped at the crowd. This is ridiculous. But they didn't sit down. The applause grew louder. Some people were even cheering. Kay Adams looked mortified, her head in her hands. Nadia stared at her lap, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Elton gave a small bow to the audience, acknowledging their support. Thank you, he said to them. Thank you for understanding. He turned and walked toward the exit. A producer rushed onto the set, trying to convince him to stay, but Elton gently brushed past without slowing down. His security team, who had been waiting in the wings, quickly surrounded him as he left the studio floor. Back at the panel, Denise tried to regain control. "Well, that was dramatic," she said with false brightness. "I guess some people can't handle honest discussion." The audience booed. Actually booed her. Janet Street Porter shook her head in disgust. "Denise, you were out of line," Janet said bluntly. "That was embarrassing to watch." "Oh, come off it," Denise shot back. "I was doing my job." "Your job is to interview guests, not attack them," Kay finally spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "That was horrible. You were horrible." Nadia nodded in agreement. "I've never been so uncomfortable during a show. What were you thinking?" Denise looked around at her fellow panelists, all of whom were staring at her with varying degrees of disappointment and anger. The audience continued to murmur disapprovingly. "I can't believe you're all turning on me," Denise said defensively. "He's the one who walked out." "Because you gave him no choice," Janet replied sharply. "You questioned his talent, his relevance, his fans, everything about him. What did you expect would happen?" A stage manager appeared, signaling frantically that they needed to go to commercial. The cameras cut away from the panel, but the damage had been done. The most successful musician in the room had been driven away by a host who thought being provocative was more important than being respectful. In the green room, Elton was already gathering his things. His manager was on the phone, presumably dealing with the fallout. A production assistant approached nervously. "Mr. John, the producers would like to know if you'd reconsider," she said quietly. "Maybe come back after the break." Elton looked at her kindly. "Please tell your producers that I appreciate the invitation. But no, what happened out there was unacceptable, and I won't pretend otherwise by going back." "I understand," she nodded. "And for what it's worth, I thought you handled that with incredible grace." She was completely out of line. "Thank you," Elton smiled at her. "I've been in this business long enough to know when to stand my ground." Back in the studio, the show returned from commercial break. Denise sat at the panel looking defiant, while her co-hosts all appeared tense and unhappy. "Welcome back," Denise said to the camera. "As you saw before the break, our guest Elton John decided to leave the show. We'll be continuing with our next segment." But the energy in the studio had completely changed. The audience sat quietly, many with their arms crossed. The usual warmth and camaraderie of the show had evaporated, replaced by an awkward tension that hung over everything. Janet interrupted before Denise could move on. "I think we need to address what just happened. We can't just pretend that was normal." "There's nothing to address," Denise said curtly. "He couldn't handle the questions." "He could handle the questions just fine," Kay countered. "What he couldn't handle was being disrespected on live television. None of us should have to handle that." The audience applauded again, showing their agreement. Denise's face reddened as she realized she was completely isolated. Even her own panel had turned against her. "You're all being ridiculous," she muttered. Nadia leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera. "I want to apologize to Elton John on behalf of the show. What happened here today was not okay. He deserved better, and I'm sorry we didn't do more to stop it." More applause from the audience. Janet and Kay both nodded their agreement with Nadia's statement. Denise stood up abruptly. "Fine. If you're all going to gang up on me, I don't need to sit here either." "Denise, sit down," Janet said firmly. "You started this mess, and you're going to see it through." But Denise was already removing her microphone. "I don't have to take this from any of you." She stormed off the set, leaving the remaining three panelists sitting in stunned silence. The audience didn't know whether to laugh, gasp, or applaud. The show had completely fallen apart in the span of less than an hour. Kay turned to the camera with a weak smile. "Well, this has certainly been an eventful show." We're going to take another break and regroup. The cameras cut away again. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Producers scrambled to figure out how to salvage the rest of the program. The remaining panelists huddled together, discussing what to do next. And somewhere in the building, both Elton John and Denise Welch were in separate rooms, each convinced they'd been wronged. But the audience knew the truth. They'd watched a talented, accomplished artist come onto a show ready to share his work and his passion. They'd watched a host attack him repeatedly, questioning everything from his relevance to his worth. And they'd watched that artist stand up for himself with dignity and strength, refusing to be diminished by someone who clearly didn't understand or appreciate what he'd achieved. When the show came back from its second commercial break, only 3 panelists sat at the desk. They spent the rest of the hour trying to recover, but the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a pleasant chat about music and life had turned into a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. The conversation continued without Denise, but her absence hung over everything. Kay, Janet, and Nadia tried their best to carry on, but they kept circling back to what had happened, unable to fully move past it. I just can't stop thinking about how that escalated, Nadia said during a discussion about their next topic. One minute we're talking about an album, the next minute everything's falling apart. It escalated because Denise wanted it to, Janet said bluntly. She went into that interview looking for conflict, and she found it. The audience murmured their agreement. Several people nodded vigorously. Kay sighed heavily. I feel terrible that we didn't intervene sooner. We should have shut it down the moment she started questioning his relevance. We tried, Nadia reminded her. She just kept going. Still, Kay shook her head. We're a panel. We should have been more forceful. Elton John deserved better from all of us. A woman in the audience raised her hand, and Kay gestured for her to speak. I just want to say, the woman began, standing up, I've been a fan of this show for years, but what I saw today was disgusting. That man has brought joy to millions of people with his music, and he was treated like garbage. I don't think I can watch anymore after this. Several other audience members voiced their agreement. Some even got up and walked out of the studio right then, making their feelings crystal clear. Janet watched them go with a grim expression. I don't blame them, she said quietly. This was a disaster. The show limped to its conclusion, but everyone knew this episode would be talked about for years to come. Not because of anything insightful or entertaining that was said, but because of how spectacularly wrong it had gone. In a corridor backstage, Elton John walked toward the exit with his head held high. Staff members he passed offered apologetic smiles and words of support. He thanked each of them graciously, never once losing his composure or dignity. His manager caught up with him at the door. The press is already going crazy with this. Social media is exploding. Everyone's on your side. I didn't do it for publicity, Elton replied calmly. I did it because I wasn't going to sit there and be disrespected. Life's too short to tolerate that kind of treatment from anyone. Still, his manager continued, this is going to be huge news. The video is already being shared everywhere. Elton paused at the exit and looked back toward the studio. Good, he said simply. Maybe it will make other hosts think twice before they decide to attack their guests for entertainment value. He pushed through the door and stepped out into the sunlight, leaving the chaos of the studio behind him. Inside, the show was wrapping up with forced smiles and awkward transitions. The audience filed out, many of them still discussing what they'd witnessed. The panelists removed their microphones in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what had transpired. And somewhere in another part of the building, Denise Welch sat alone, still convinced she'd done nothing wrong, unable to see how her need to be provocative had destroyed what should have been a pleasant interview with a music legend. The contrast couldn't have been starker. On one side, an artist with decades of achievements and millions of fans worldwide, who'd stood up for himself with grace and strength. On the other, a talk show host who'd let her ego and desire for dramatic television override basic courtesy and respect. The studio audience had seen it clearly. The viewing audience at home would see it clearly when the episode aired. And history would remember this as the day a legend refused to be diminished by someone who confused cruelty with courage and attacks with journalism. The makeup artist in the green room had tried to make small talk with Elton before the interview, mentioning how excited she was to meet him. She'd told him about growing up listening to his music, about how Rocket Man had been her father's favorite song. He'd smiled warmly and thanked her, asking about her father, genuinely interested in her story. That was the man who'd walked onto the Loose Women set, kind, gracious, willing to connect with anyone who approached him with respect. That same warmth had been evident when he first sat down. Despite Denise's immediate sharp tone, he'd tried to answer her questions thoughtfully. When she'd cut him off mid-sentence for the first time, he'd simply paused and waited for her to finish, then attempted to continue. Professional, patient, polite. But there's a difference between patience and allowing yourself to be a doormat. And Elton John had learned long ago where that line was. Back in the studio, after the show finally ended, Janet Street Porter pulled Kay and Nadia aside. "That was the most uncomfortable hour of television I've ever been part of," she said, her voice low and serious. "And I've been doing this for 30 years. "She's done this before," Kay admitted quietly. "Not quite this bad, but she has a tendency to push guests too far. I've warned the producers about it." Nadia looked shocked. "Why hasn't anything been done?" "Because it gets ratings," Kay said bitterly. "Controversy sells. But this time she went too far. She pushed out a music legend on live television. There's no coming back from that." Janet nodded slowly. "The network is going to have to make a choice. They can stand by her and lose credibility, or they can acknowledge what happened and make changes." Meanwhile, in her own dressing room, Denise replayed the interview in her head, but through a distorted lens. In her version, she'd been doing hard-hitting journalism, asking the tough questions nobody else would ask, refusing to let a celebrity coast through an interview on charm alone. She couldn't see, or wouldn't see, that there's a difference between challenging questions and personal attacks, between holding someone accountable and simply being mean-spirited. A producer knocked on her door. "Denise, we need to talk about what happened out there." "What about it?" she snapped. "I did my job." "You drove away one of the biggest names in music," the producer said carefully. "Live on air, in front of our audience, after insulting him repeatedly." "I asked him legitimate questions." The producer shook his head. "You asked him when he was going to stop making music because you think he's irrelevant. You mocked his fans. You questioned everything about his career and his worth. That's not journalism, Denise. That's cruelty." "Oh, please," she waved him off. "He's a celebrity. He can handle it." Clearly he couldn't, the producer pointed out. Or rather, he chose not to. And honestly, I don't blame him. I'm getting calls from every media outlet in the country wanting to know what happened. Social media is tearing us apart. This is a PR nightmare. Denise finally looked worried. "What are they saying?" "They're saying you ambushed a respected artist. They're saying you were rude, disrespectful, and unprofessional. They're calling for you to be removed from the show. And frankly, after watching that back, I can't say they're wrong." The color drained from her face. "You're not seriously considering that?" "I'm not considering anything yet," the producer said. "But the network executives are going to have opinions, and they're not going to be happy. You need to think very carefully about how you want to handle this going forward." He left, closing the door behind him. Denise sat alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time since the interview ended, doubt crept in. Had she really gone too far? Back at the panel desk, crew members were cleaning up. One camera operator turned to his colleague. "In all my years on this show, I've never seen anything like that." Me neither, the other agreed. The audience was appalled. The way he handled it, though, he didn't yell or lose control. He just stood up for himself and walked away. Out in the parking lot, Elton's car was pulling away. He sat in the back seat looking out the window. His manager was fielding calls, but Elton wanted quiet. He thought about all the interviews he'd done, thousands of them, but this one would stick with him. Not because of what Denise said, but because of the choice he made. He could have stayed, could have endured the interview and pretended everything was fine. But he'd learned something over 50 years in music. Your time is valuable. Your dignity is valuable. And no publicity is worth sacrificing either. His phone buzzed with a text from Bernie Taupin. Just saw what happened. Proud of you. She was way out of line. Elton smiled and typed back. Thanks, Bernie. Sometimes you have to draw a line. Inside the studio building, the remaining panelists talked privately. Janet pulled Kay aside. I meant what I said. We should have done more. I know, Kay agreed. I tried, but she steamrolled right over me. We should have tried harder, Janet insisted. We're a team. When one of us goes off the rails, the rest need to pull her back. We failed Elton today. Nadia joined them. I just talked to my husband. He watched at home, and he's furious. He said I should have walked off in protest. Maybe we all should have, Janet said. Maybe that would have sent a stronger message. The three women stood together, united in their discomfort and determination to do better. They couldn't change what happened, but they could learn. An audience member was near the exit, talking to a friend. I can't believe what I just saw, she said. I came here expecting fun, and instead I saw someone I admire get bullied on live television. Those questions about his age and relevance, her friend added. Who does she think she is? Exactly. He's Elton John. He's written some of the most beautiful songs ever created, and she's acting like he's washed up and worthless. They weren't alone in that sentiment. All across the studio, departing audience members were expressing similar feelings. The show had lost viewers, not just those in the seats. The studio's social media manager was frantically managing the flood of comments. Every platform was blowing up with criticism. People were posting clips, dissecting every moment. This is really bad, she told her supervisor. We're getting overwhelmingly negative comments. People are calling for accountability. Her supervisor rubbed his temples. Keep monitoring it. The executives will want a full report. What had happened went beyond a bad interview. It revealed something about character and how you treat people with power. Denise had held all the cards. She was the host. Elton was the guest. The power was in her favor, and she'd used it not to create conversation, but to diminish someone who'd achieved far more. The makeup artist who'd spoken with Elton was packing up when a crew member asked about it. You were with him before, right? Did he seem okay? He seemed lovely, she replied. Sweet, kind, interested in talking even though I'm nobody special. He asked about my family. Made me feel valued. Makes what happened out there even worse, the crew member said. I know, the makeup artist agreed. He came in here ready to be gracious and friendly, and he was attacked for it. And through it all, Denise remained unwilling to acknowledge what she'd done. In her mind, she'd been doing her job. She couldn't see that good television doesn't require cruelty. Different people carried away different lessons. Some learned about standing up for yourself. Others learned about the dangers of power. Elton John had come to Loose Women to share his music. Instead, he shared something more valuable, self-respect and courage to stand up when it matters. And as his car left the studio, he knew he'd done the right thing.